So, what exactly do you mean when you say, "What do you mean?"
I do not understand this. This really confuses me.
What's that supposed to mean? What's that supposed to mean?
What's that supposed to mean?
I don't know what you're talking about.
What are you talking about?
What's that supposed to mean?
Cultural anthropologist Ujwal Arkalgud and Motive Base president Jason Partridge will tell you that perception and meaning are the primary pressure points that shape and create the world we live in.
Inconceivable! You keep using that word.
Let's explore why meaning matters.
I don't think it means what you think it means.
Now, here's your host, Aaron Trafford.
Hello, welcome in. Welcome to the podcast with the sole job of asking you and helping you to answer the very fundamental question, why meaning matters. So we've been tackling some really big things, conversations about wealth, around the social contract, around political and economic shifts in meaning over generations. But also in the last few episodes, we've gotten a little bit more granular, dissecting these shifts and changes that we're seeing in culture from a gender perspective, from a feminine and masculine perspective. And in the last show, if you didn't catch it, we had some fun talking about our kids and superheroes and how they're being fed these myths that either serve to reinforce or disrupt certain status quo. And I'm still thinking to myself, though, Ujwal and Jason, I don't know, I'm still asking this question, why does this matter? Can these conversations that we're having help us and help you and organizations, companies, leaders, politicians really create positive ground level change? And when I'm saying that, I'm thinking of these huge, ginormous issues and challenges that we're facing right now as a culture, as a planet, that a large percentage of the population, safe to say, cannot agree on right now. Things like sustainability, the meaning of going green, right? These are big, big, big things that all have meanings. And I think we have to get on the same page before any real discernible action can happen to solve them. So I'll leave this to you two. I'm going to kind of drop a bomb in the middle of our podcast and just see where this goes. But how do we take this huge global issue within the context of meaning, like sustainability, and make it matter or feel tangible to the individual when the collective can't agree?
I think you hit the nail on the head. The collective can't agree. And, in essence, what we do when we study meaning is we also measure how much consensus there is, or how much consensus is building around what something means. And the reason we measure consensus, and we've talked about this a few episodes ago, is because there's a minimum amount of consensus required for something to be relevant to the mainstream, right? For example, you take a topic like sustainability. We have to agree as a people, we have to agree on what this thing actually means tangibly. What does it actually mean for it to be relevant to the mainstream? At the moment, we're far from there because the meanings around sustainability are actually very diverse. They're not converging fast enough. Even though the word sustainability is mentioned a lot and talked about a lot, there's not enough convergence happening on what it actually means. That's the part that's interesting for us, and I'm excited to unpack this a bit more.
Mm-hmm. Jay, what do you think? How do we get these meaning? How do we get to convergence faster?
I think that one of the biggest problems that we have is going back to this thing that Ujwal just said is understanding and where we can find the connective tissue that will pull an idea from a small group of people, but make it emotionally relevant to a larger group of people. At the end of the day, there's small little kind of needs that are kind of populating themselves amongst these very intelligent or very, very passionate or very dedicated groups of people. But for something to really kind of catch on fire, for something to become really relevant, everybody has to come together to really kind of agree upon why it matters. And, this is where we see people attaching a vulnerability to something in order for it to become emotionally relevant to larger groups of consumers, larger groups of people. And that's essentially what needs to happen here. I think the other problem is that, if I asked everybody to close their eyes right now and think about sustainability, everybody has a different idea in their mind. There's no kind of one solid kind of island that we should be swimming to in an ocean of need. And that in and of itself is a problem. It needs to be in some instances branded in a way that we can all come to an agreement in regards to what do we need to do and why.
So you just said so many things. I need to unpack this. So I'm hearing you say, you use the word emotion a bunch of times. And I feel like, tell me if I'm wrong, marketers use emotion, but a little bit, is it fair to say that they're afraid of using it too much, of really touching that nerve to create change? Because I think that's what you're saying. We need to cultivate empathy in order to understand what matters to us.
It's really hard to convince a large group of people to do something entirely on logic.
Right.
And they need to feel that it is important for themselves as the individual and for that larger group of people. Let me give you an example. We think about sustainability and we constantly hear about rising tides. We hear about all these potential outcomes that are really hard for us to envision and really hard for us to put ourselves in the situation. I come from a small town, okay? If somebody's house burnt down, everybody comes together to help that family because we can all put ourselves emotionally into that idea. I don't have my stuff. I don't have a roof over my head. All these things are things that I can put myself in the shoes of that person and I can start to empathize in a way that really starts to make me act. I think one of the biggest problems that we have with sustainability is these are really big problems, but they're also very, very hard to conceptualize, and they're really, really hard to think about as the individual and how they're going to impact you.
And so this is something that, calling back to days in the newsroom, we used to vet stories for whether it was the lead or the bottom of the newscast for things like that. Like, how many people does this impact? Is it relevant? Does it have emotional resonance? And some of the things that the lens that we used to use was often this sort of three-pronged approach of, does it hit them in the wallet? Because that's going to make it relevant to a lot of people. Does it hit them, to your point about the hometown, does it hit them in their geographic area, right? Like if the theater that I went on my first date with my husband to burns down, that's going to affect me in my town. But then the other one was, does it hit them in the heartstrings? Does it pull on that emotion? And then you kind of transcend geography and finance. But that's the hardest one to actually communicate, I think. Ujwal, does that, I don't know. I learned that in J school, but is that kind of what we're talking about here?
Yeah, and I'll give you an example, just to build on what Jason was just saying. If you study the meanings around just the word sustainability and you compare it to the meanings around sustainable products, and then let's say you compare it to the meanings around something even more tangible, like reducing water waste, you'll find that reducing water waste is in the mainstream. It's very tangible. People understand and agree on what that is. And to your point, it also potentially hits their wallet, right? Sustainable products is in between sustainability and reducing water waste, because a sustainable product now is a bit more tangible than it was even a couple of years ago. So there's a fair bit of agreement on what that means. So maybe the packaging is better for me, maybe the ingredients are better, and so on. But there's still work to be done. The reason I bring this up, and by the way, you can refer to the show notes if you want to see this visual, because we've actually put a visual of the maturity calculation that we've run on looking at how much consensus there is around these three words. And it's a great example because if we want to drive, and when I say we, I mean, let's say I represent a brand and I want to drive an improvement in sales, better margins because of certain sustainable outcomes I'm implementing. I have to find a tangible representation of that sustainable outcome and make it relevant to my business. right? I can't just say, hey, this is more sustainable. It's not going to solve a problem because people don't agree on what it means. I can't just say, hey, this is a sustainable product. Not enough people agree on what it means. However, if I say, hey, by the way, if you buy my jeans, you will have saved 40% in water usage in the way this jean was manufactured. Okay, that's tangible. And I can compare this jean to the other one and go, this is 40% less water. There we go. So there has to be something tangible. And in a lot of cases, our job is to study meaning so that we can help these organizations figure out what is the tangible benefit of sustainability that can apply to the context of your brand, your product, your solution.
Okay, so here's what I want to understand this. Like, I really want to understand this. We're going to make it matter by teasing out that emotion, right? Like, I want to be sustainable because I feel connected to that value proposition of helping the earth, helping my community. But in order to make that matter to the corporation and to me, as in to push me to act towards purchasing that product, we need to have that tangible outcome. So I'm going to order using my you do it all the time, my shop app, my Shopify app. And every time I do that, it says, you saved this much because this is a carbon neutral purchase. And I'm like, oh yeah.
Right.
Is that the transaction? It starts with the emotional value laden, I want to be sustainable, I want to help the environment, but what do I really get out of this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. Let's talk about that just very briefly. What do I get out of this? And there's generally two major things you could get out of it. One is that it helps you do something better, right? So the product actually is better or healthier or saves you money, right? So there's a tangible benefit to it. Even if it sounds crazy, hey, I may not get cancer because I'm using this cleaning product over the other one. There's a tangible benefit in the mind of the consumer. That's one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is this thing we call, in sociology, we call it symbolic capital. And it's like having money in your wallet, but it's symbolic currency. And the reason why we call it symbolic capital, it comes from a French sociologist who coined it, named Pierre Bourdieu. And the concept is really critical because it says that just like money and goods, we also trade symbolic capital. So when we're hanging out with people, we might say, hey, by the way, we switched to bar soaps in our home, in all our bathrooms, because they're way more sustainable. And by the way, they're actually biodegradable. Did you know that the hand pump soap that you put in your bathroom is not? Oh, really? And suddenly there's a conversation. But in that conversation, I have gained for myself status, prestige, symbolic power in that moment, in that conversation. Now that's a value. So I bring it up because there are two sort of value systems at play, especially when it comes to sustainability. One is that tangible benefit, health, well-being, saving money. The other is the symbolic benefit. Both are just as valuable. And obviously, ideally, the holy grail is you deliver both.
Mm-hmm. So it's like does this actually mean that to be sustainable, that what you're seeing evolve is that it's like is this a classist thing where to be more sustainable means you have an elevated status?
Absolutely. I mean, the funny thing is, no matter what we do, we attain status and some sort of one-upmanship. It's just human nature, you know? And I mean, if you go back to sort of the foundational research and researchers in the early 20th century, you'll see tons and tons of research of even primitive civilizations and civilizations that are disconnected from sort of modern culture still have these norms and these habits that help them trade and gain symbolic currency and status and power and prestige. So it is something that is definitely innately human about us. Now, the reason why it applies to sustainability more so than anything else is exactly coming back to Jason's earlier point. Sustainability is such a undefined, or is one of those terms that has such little agreement, such little consensus in culture, that we have to find ways to find versions of it that have more consensus, that are more tangible, that apply to our businesses.
So we're at the cusp of this myth turning into meaning, and we're kind of all trying to figure out where that arrow is going to land. So fascinating. So one thing that's occurring to me as we're talking about this is that the prestige around I use all natural products for my kids, or I eat all natural, no chemical, blah, 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 blah. I feel like there's something here because that's also a big marketing tool that a lot of companies use. And I'm guessing that we don't all fully understand what that means.
100%. And in fact, sustainability and all natural have a deep relationship. They're in bed together, and I would love to unpack that a little bit in the next episode.
All right, let's do that. Okay, if you have anything to weigh in on, please feel free to drop us an email, hello@storystudionetwork.com, and you can find our show Why Meaning Matters on all the major podcast networks, so make sure you subscribe, follow so you don't miss an episode. And we would also love if you comment on social media or share this with your friends. It goes a long way to keeping the show engaging and getting in and really discussing why meaning matters.
Thanks for listening to Why Meaning Matters with Ujwal Arkulgud, Jason Partridge, and your host, Aaron Trafford.
Inconceivable! You keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
Why Meaning Matters is produced for Motive Base and the Story Studio Network by Eye Contact Productions.